You think disappearing makes you weak, like you're running away, hiding, proving you care less. But here's the truth nobody's telling you. The longer you disappear, the more she thinks about you. Not because absence is a game, not because silence is manipulation, but because presence without value is noise. And noise gets ignored. When you remove yourself, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, you stop being predictable. You stop being available. You stop being the man who waits by the phone, who bends his schedule, who sacrifices his peace just to stay in her orbit. And when you stop all of that, something shifts. You become the question she can't stop trying to answer. Let me be clear. This isn't a tactic. This isn't about making her chase or playing emotional chess. If that's why you clicked, close this video right now. What I'm about to give you is deeper than strategy. It's about understanding the psychology of value, the nature of desire, and why your constant availability is killing the very attraction you're trying to build. If you need someone to keep reminding you of these truths, because the world will try to convince you that chasing harder is love, that being always available is loyalty, hit subscribe right now. You don't need more advice. You need consistent recalibration. You need a voice that tells you what's real, not what's comfortable. So do it. Subscribe. Because this conversation doesn't end here, and you're going to need these reminders when your emotions try to override your logic. Now let's get into it. Here's what it really means when I say, the longer you disappear, the more she thinks about you. It's not magic. It's not manipulation. It's psychology. It's the scarcity principle meeting emotional investment. When you're always there, always texting back instantly, always clearing your calendar, always making her the center of your world, you become predictable. And predictability, in the context of attraction, is death. Not because women are shallow, not because they're playing games, but because human beings, all of us, value what we have to work for. We obsess over what we can't fully control. We think about what isn't constantly available. That's not a gender thing. That's a human thing. And when you're always present, always accessible, always waiting, you're not giving her space to wonder. You're not giving her room to miss you. You're not giving her the chance to realize what it feels like when you're not there. So what happens when you disappear? Not in a petty way, not in a I'm going to ghost her to teach her a lesson way, but in a grounded, self-respecting way. You stop initiating every conversation. You stop being the one who always reaches out. You stop rearranging your life to fit into hers. You stop giving your time, attention, and energy to someone who isn't matching your investment. And when you do that, you create a vacuum, a silence, a gap where you used to be. And that gap? It gets filled with her thoughts about you. She starts to notice your absence. She starts to replay your last conversation. She starts to wonder why you're not texting. She starts to question whether she took you for granted. She starts to feel the weight of what it's like when you're not around. And slowly, without her even realizing it, you become more present in her mind when you're absent from her life than you ever were when you were constantly available. But let's break down the misconception first. Most men think that showing up constantly equals showing you care, that being available 24/7 equals loyalty, that responding instantly equals interest. And on the surface, that sounds noble. It sounds like the right thing to do. But here's the hard truth. Care without boundaries is desperation. Loyalty without reciprocity is self-betrayal. Interest without self-respect is neediness. And women, people, don't desire neediness. They don't respect desperation. They don't fantasize about someone who has no life outside of them. They're attracted to someone who has a center, someone who has purpose, someone who has a life so full, so rich, so grounded that their attention is a gift, not a guarantee. And when you're always there, you're signaling the opposite. You're signaling that you have nothing better to do, that she's your only option, that your world revolves around her validation. And that is not attractive. That is not powerful. That is not masculine. That is a man who's lost himself trying to prove his worth to someone who hasn't earned his devotion. So why does this happen? Why do men fall into this trap? Because we're taught the wrong things. We're taught that love is sacrifice. That devotion means putting her first, always, that if you're not constantly available, you don't care enough. And so we overcompensate, we overfunction, we become emotional butlers, always on call, always ready to serve, always waiting for permission to feel valued. And the irony? The more we do this, the less valued we become, because value isn't determined by how much you give. Value is determined by how much someone has to invest to receive what you offer. And when you give everything for free, with no boundaries, no limits, no reciprocity required, you become common. You become expected. You become background noise in her life. And background noise doesn't get remembered. It doesn't get missed. It doesn't get thought about when the room goes quiet. Now let's talk about what it costs you. When you're always available, always chasing, always proving, you lose your center. You lose your peace. You lose your time, your energy, your focus. You stop working on your goals because you're too busy managing her emotions. You stop building your future because you're too invested in securing her attention. You stop respecting yourself because you've made her approval the measure of your worth. And over time, you become a shell. A version of yourself you don't recognize. A man who's so desperate to be chosen that he's forgotten he has the power to choose. And that's the real cost. Not just losing her, but losing yourself in the process. And when you finally wake up, when you realize you've been running on empty, giving to someone who wasn't giving back, the resentment is overwhelming. The regret is suffocating because you didn't just lose time, you lost your self-respect. And that, brother, is something no relationship is worth. So here's the reframe. Disappearing isn't about punishing her. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's about stepping back and asking, am I giving because I want to, or because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't? It's about realizing that your presence should be a choice, not a compulsion, that your time is valuable, that your attention is precious, that you don't owe anyone access to you just because they exist in your life. When you disappear, when you stop initiating, stop chasing, stop overfunctioning, you're not being cold. You're being honest. You're saying, I'm not going to keep investing in something that doesn't invest back. I'm not going to keep showing up for someone who takes my presence for granted. I'm not going to keep being available to someone who isn't making me a priority. And that honesty, that boundary, that self-respect, that is what makes you magnetic. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because you're being hard to ignore. Let me paint you a picture. The man who understands this doesn't disappear out of ego. He disappears because he has somewhere to be. He has purpose. He has goals. He has a life that demands his attention. He's not sitting around waiting for her to text back. He's building, he's improving, he's investing in himself. He's working on his business, his body, his mind, his craft. He's surrounded by people who respect him. He's engaged in activities that fulfill him. He's living a life so full that her absence doesn't create a void. It just creates space for more growth. And when he does show up, when he does reach out, when he does give his time, it means something. It's intentional. It's valuable. It's rare. And she feels that. She senses that. She knows on some instinctual level that his attention isn't cheap, that his presence isn't guaranteed, that he's the kind of man who has options, who has standards, who won't settle for being taken for granted. And that is the man she thinks about. That is the man she wonders about. That is the man who stays in her mind long after the conversation ends. Now let's get practical. What does this look like in action? First, you stop initiating every conversation. If you've been the one always texting first, always calling first, always making plans, stop. Let there be silence. Let her feel your absence. See if she reaches out. See if she puts in effort. See if she values what you've been giving. If she does, great. If she doesn't, you have your answer. You've been investing in someone who doesn't care if you're there or not. And that's not a relationship. That's a one-sided addiction. Second, you stop being immediately available. When she texts, you don't respond in 30 seconds. You respond when you're ready, when you're done with your workout, your work, your obligations. You respect your time. You honor your priorities. You don't drop everything just to prove you care, because that's not care. That's insecurity. Third, you stop changing your plans for her. If you have something scheduled, a gym session, a meeting, a commitment, you don't cancel it just because she's suddenly free. You say, I've got plans, but we can link up later. You show her that your life doesn't revolve around her availability, that you're not sitting around waiting for her to give you permission to exist. Fourth, you invest in yourself relentlessly. You work on your body. You work on your skills. You work on your income. You work on your social circle. You become so focused on your own growth that her validation becomes irrelevant. And when you reach that point, when you genuinely don't need her to feel whole, that's when everything changes. Because now you're not disappearing to get a reaction. You're disappearing because you have a life worth living. And that authenticity, that groundedness, that self-sufficiency, that is what makes her think about you. That is what makes her miss you. That is what makes her realize she might have lost something real. Here's what you need to understand. Silence is not cruelty. Boundaries are not punishment. Absence is not abandonment. When you step back, you're not rejecting her. You're protecting yourself. You're refusing to participate in a dynamic where your presence is expected but not appreciated. You're refusing to be the man who begs for scraps of attention. You're refusing to be the man who tolerates disrespect, inconsistency, and low effort just to avoid being alone. And that refusal, that standard, that is what separates you from every other man she's dealt with. Because most men stay. Most men tolerate. Most men keep chasing even when it's clear she's not interested. But you walk away. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. But with dignity. With clarity. With the knowledge that your time and energy are too valuable to waste on someone who doesn't see your worth. And that decision, that quiet, powerful decision, is what plants the seed in her mind. The seed that grows into curiosity, into regret, into realization, into the thought that maybe, just maybe, she let a good man go. But let's be real. This isn't about winning her back. This isn't about getting her to chase. This is about you reclaiming your power. This is about you realizing that you don't need anyone to validate your existence, that you are enough with or without her, that your worth isn't determined by whether she texts back, whether she makes time, whether she chooses you. Your worth is intrinsic. It's built through your actions, your character, your commitment to yourself. And when you internalize that, when you truly believe that, you stop disappearing to get a reaction. You disappear because you have better things to do. You disappear because you're focused on building a life that doesn't require anyone else to complete it. And that energy, that self-contained, purpose-driven, unapologetic energy, that is what makes you unforgettable. That is what makes you magnetic. That is what makes her think about you long after you're gone. So here's the truth, unfiltered. If you've been chasing, stop. If you've been overfunctioning, stop. If you've been giving your all to someone who's giving you the bare minimum, stop. You are not a beggar. You are not a consolation prize. You are not a man who should have to convince anyone of your value. You are the prize. You are the catch. You are the one who should be chosen, pursued, and valued. And if she doesn't see that, it's not your job to make her see it. It's your job to walk away and find someone who does. Because the right woman won't make you disappear to get her attention. She'll notice you when you're there. She'll appreciate you. She'll match your energy. She'll invest in you the way you invest in her. And until you find that, your job is to invest in yourself, to build, to grow, to become the kind of man who doesn't need to play games because his life speaks for itself. The kind of man who doesn't chase because he's too busy creating. The kind of man who doesn't disappear out of pettiness, but out of purpose. And when you become that man, you won't have to wonder if she's thinking about you. You won't care, because you'll be too focused on the life you're building to be distracted by the opinion of someone who didn't know your value when she had it. You are the answer, not her, not some tactic, not some script. You, your growth, your boundaries, your self-respect. That is what changes everything. That is what makes you powerful. That is what makes you free. So disappear. Not to manipulate, but to reclaim. Disappear into your purpose, disappear into your goals, disappear into the man you're becoming, and let her think about that version of you. Let her wonder, let her regret. And when she reaches out, you decide if she's earned the right to be in your life again. Because you're not the man who waits anymore. You're the man who moves. And that, brother, is the man she'll never forget. If this hit you where you needed it, subscribe, because you're going to need this voice again when the doubt creeps in, when the loneliness whispers, when the temptation to go back shows up. You need a place that reminds you who you are, a community of men who are choosing themselves, who are building themselves, who refuse to settle. This is that place. You belong here. Now go disappear into greatness.